Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, the podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. Today's guest is a longtime friend based in Charlotte, North Carolina, the home of Ric Flair. His name is David Brown. He is a IT guru who has worked in many major companies. He also has ties to a major role-playing game company. Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, David.
Hey, thank you, David. How you been?
I'm doing pretty good. It's the tale of two Davids today.
Yeah, right. It's going to get confusing.
So let's go right into it. Our past brought us together. I was looking for a role-playing game group when I moved to Charlotte, and you responded, and a motley crew of people showed up at a church.
Yeah, church basement. Yeah, right.
Yeah, to play Dungeons and Dragons inside of a church.
Yeah, we were breaking several rules all around, I'm sure.
I'm pretty sure that if it had been like 10, 15 years ago, there would have been no role-playing game, and it would have actually been like us being converted.
Right. Yeah.
So how did you get into gaming, role-playing specifically?
I'm old, so my first experience with it was the first edition of D&D. I had a real fortunate, introduction to it due to I lived in New Jersey at the time, and they had a thing called Super Saturday, which was like extracurricular events that you could do if you were, I don't remember if you had to be in the gifted program, but anyway, long and short of it was you could get 2 2-hour-long sessions every Saturday if you chose it. And they were running Dungeons and Dragons, and I'd gotten some of the books and was very interested. My mom was pretty cool. She was like, yeah, you can do that for one session, but you got to do something a little bit more, beneficial for the other one. So I took other courses, but I actually, this guy who ran this, I actually did it for 3 different, kind of semesters. So he ran us through B4, the Lost City. He ran us through X2, the Castle de Amberville. And then he ran us through I6, the Pharaoh. So I had a really good introduction to Dungeons & Dragons and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. So it was really cool to do that, to actually be led by an adult who knew what they were doing. And I got real into the books. I remember cruising the Walden Books anytime I was at the mall and would, hit up their game section. And I had a huge selection, and I got really into Dragonlance when those books came out.
Okay. And
those were the big thing for me. And of course, there were some other games that I started to become aware of. I got the WEG Star Wars D6 books. In fact, I still have those original books. Most of my early D&D stuff I traded for comics money, but that's a whole nother story. But then I think I remember playing Top Secret and Gamma World and a bunch of cool, early 80s stuff. And it was about 89 or so, I was going into high school and more interested in girls and not being viewed as such a nerd. So I kind of, I gave up on it. But in about 2003, I kind of kept in touch with things, and I had dabbled in other, miniature games and card games, Magic a couple times. And so I saw what was happening with the D&D, and I kind of stopped doing it right around the 2nd edition when it was coming out. But I saw the Eberron book, and Eberron just blew my mind for setting. I really liked the art and the setting concept and all the different, areas in that world. So that brought me back to gaming, and especially because a lot of the stuff I'd been doing was very solo. I didn't have a lot of kind of social interaction, and that was what I was missing. And so doing the gaming, and I found one gaming group and played with them, and then that didn't work out so well. But then I started the game that you joined, and myself and another guy, were seeking people, and you and some others joined us, and that group is still going strong. They meet every Friday. I moved on the other side of town, so I don't game with them very much. But I do game all the time now, and it's a big passion of mine.
Yeah, I found when I was growing up, it was my mom had started one of those little mall kiosk type shops, and we would go on the weekends to hang out at the mall for like all day. Yeah. And it was a B. Dalton for me, where go to the gaming section, and the second edition Races books are the first books that I remember picking up, and those were drawn like it wasn't the book so much as the art originally, like the Book of Elves and the Book of Dwarves. Sure. And those were the first books that I picked up, and then that was followed by the West End game Star Wars. The only problem is I didn't have anyone to play like throughout high school. I tried live action role playing, and you know who I am. I am not a social person like for acting and doing stuff out. Like I like sitting at the table. So I didn't get into Dungeons and Dragons until college, when I moved away to University of West Florida and found a group there. And we did second edition, and then third edition had just came out, and we transitioned over to that game. But we would game during college, like Friday nights. We would start at like 6 or 7 o'clock and game until 4 or 5 in the morning.
Very cool.
Sleep until noon, and then continue gaming through Saturday into Sunday. And then we alternated between Dungeons and Dragons, D20 Star Wars at the time, and Vampire.
Nice.
Gaming is one of those things where I'm so glad I found it. I wish I had found it sooner, but I'm glad that for the time that I've had with it so far. Yeah,
so I mean, getting back into it for me was really rekindling something that I did. And my earlier experiences, except for that, organized game that I played with the adult, most of my experiences were reading the books and sitting around with my friends and sort of playing. I didn't really read through the rules. I don't think I played very well to that. There was another one I left out, the Palladium Games Robotech books. And all that I loved. I loved it as the source material, especially, like a lot of things that are kind of taken as Star Wars canon, the role-playing games, defined. The West End games, Greedo as a Rhodian, Hammerhead as an Ithorian, all these types of things. Those came in those books, and before that, they were never defined. So that I love that kind of material, and that's a big reason why I like books, and why setting is really important to me in a book. And I had every one of the Dragonlance modules, and I have every book that Eberron, they put out for Eberron, that type of thing. And I'm a collector by nature. That started with me being into Star Wars figures as a kid, and transitioned into comics, of which I have a massive collection, and then. As I said, I had a pretty good collection of the early game stuff, but I sold a lot of it in college to a gaming / comic store in order to. I have a admission to make, is that during college, this was during the 92 to 96 boom period for comics. I had a 75 title a month comic habit.
Woo. Yeah,
so I was getting stuff like. All the Valiant books and Image, and did some Marvel. I was much bigger DC fan than anything else. So I had all the Marvels, the DC stuff, and some of the Marvel. I remember it was Executioner's Song was some of the X-Men stuff that I first got into. I was really late to X-Men. Anyway, so I now have about 13,000 comics, and I've stopped buying physical comics in the past probably 5 years. Still love my comics.
Let's go back for role playing games.
Okay, yeah.
What games are you into now? Like what are you playing on a weekly or bi-weekly, monthly basis?
So we'll probably talk a little bit in a moment about Monty Cook games, but right now I have a every 2 week Monday night game with some friends of mine, and we just started this past Monday playing a game set in the Android universe, which is Fantasy Flight Games. They have Android board games, multiple ones now, and they bought the license for Wizard of the Coast's Netrunner game, which was kind of the second game after Richard Garfield did Magic that he created.
Okay.
And they brought it back as a living card game, and they put it in their Android universe, so it's kind of a cyberpunky universe. Well, just recently, Fantasy Flight put out a setting book for the Android universe called Worlds of Android. It's a great book, but what's really cool about it is it's a setting book, but it's not married to any system at all. So, being a big fan of Monty Cook Games products, last year they released what they call the Cipher System Rulebook, which is taking out the rule set of their two popular and known games, Numenera and The Strange, and making it setting agnostic, so you can put it to any setting that you want. And that's exactly what myself and some friends are doing, is we're playing that Cipher System game set in the Android universe, and we just started this week. My character is a New Angeles police officer, detective, named Song Ji-ho. He is Korean ancestry, and he is a police detective, and we started out investigating a murder which led to another murder. My other friend is playing a hacker who has kind of become a confidant of my guy, and who he uses to help him unravel some things. And then we met a guy who we decided was my old friend from growing up, who is kind of a con man. So, and we're getting deeper and deeper into some mega corporation interactions.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and then we also play, I play a monthly game online with some friends playing in the new Fantasy Flight Star Wars universe. In that, I play a female scout spy who is it's all rebel operatives. We go on missions for the Alliance.
Okay. Now, just out of curiosity, because I haven't played Star Wars since Wizards of the Coast had it, how is Fantasy Flight handling the license? Do you feel are they handling it better than Wizards did? Because it always felt like D&D was first, and Star Wars was the afterthought.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, I know Fantasy Flight's done some other role playing, but they're very focused on it, and they're producing a good line. What can be off-putting is the way they've structured it. Is they have 3 different core books. One focused on Edge of the Empire, which is focused on kind of the smuggler, basically Han Solo before he got involved in the Rebel Alliance. Those who might have obligations is the term that they use in that they may be obligated to a Hutt cartel. They may have an addiction, all these types of things. Then they put out one called Age of Rebellion, which is focused on obviously the rebellion and working for the Alliance. So that's more of your concept in there is duty. So you have to do a duty. Like why are you serving them? And then the final piece that they put out is called Force and Destiny, and that's obviously Force sensitives, not necessarily full-on Jedis, but you certainly can go that way. But it's the base of Force sensitives, which they kind of dipped in the other two. But this is, okay, you want to become a Jedi, this is where you go. So the idea being is that, and their construct is morality. So, like, why are you a believer in the Force kind of scenario? And now that all of them are out, you certainly can have a group that is if you look at the crew on the screen, Han and Chewie were the edge of the Empire with obligations to Jabba. Luke and Leia would be more, pure. Well, I'm sorry, not Luke, but Leia would be more kind of pure Alliance serving, whereas Luke would be that Force and Destiny kind of player. So you could easily build a party across those lines now. But when it first came out, I didn't like how they were doing that, and it does kind of force you to want to buy the 3 different core books that a big chunk of them are, the same rule set. They just have different character builds in them. And so all their lines kind of, they have books that support those lines. I like how they're doing it. They do a good job with it. And the dice system it's a unique dice system. It's not a traditional, polyhedrals. What it is you have, you fail or succeed. You have threats or advantages. It kind of is a balancing system. So you might succeed barely, but you have some advantages, or you might fail, but you have some advantages. So you fail, but maybe next time you try, it's a little easier. Those are the types of things that you kind of deal with. And then it becomes kind of a negotiation with the player and the GM. Well, what does that dice roll mean?
Okay.
It's a fun system. And they're doing really well supporting it. Yeah. And I didn't hate some of the WotC or, Wizards of the Coast Saga editions and some of those. They weren't terrible. They just didn't do a great job of really kind of capturing the cinematic feel. And I think Fantasy Flight does a better job of that.
Right. I remember when it first transitioned over to Wizards, it almost felt like the two, they had the first edition and then almost felt like the second edition came out so quickly. To turn around, and then they still hadn't fixed even some of their glaring errors in the books or errata. I liked what they put out though, as far as the supporting materials, but then they did Saga, which number one was weird for the bookshelf because it didn't fit the way that you normally would want a book to fit. Right. And then all I had heard was, the Saga is really just a play test for 4th edition at that time. Is what I kept hearing. Yeah, it's kind of an in-between of what they had done with D20 and where they were going with the 4th edition. But it wasn't a bad game, and it played okay. It just the hard thing about a Star Wars game is that, blasters seem pretty lethal, unless you're a stormtrooper who can't shoot crap. Right.
A blaster is pretty lethal, so you have to do a lot of suspension of disbelief that, okay, well, you're getting hit multiple times and you're going down the damage track, but you're not just, out, So that, I think, has been a struggle with Star Wars as an RPG. I feel like Fantasy Flight has done a better job, and they actually just released a beginner set, which they have beginner sets for all 3 of their iterations, but they have a new beginner set that's themed around Force Awakens. So the adventure in it is, set in that time period, and the characters are kind of reflective of that, and all the trade dresses are reflective of that. But there's not going to be any setting materials in that time period. What they're doing is they're kind of capitalizing on the excitement of the new movie and then drawing you back into those 3 iterations. And there's, it's a very blatant thing in there that, okay, you want to play more, here are the 3 sub games of this that you can explore more in. Okay.
Well, let's get into, I want to start off by switching over to you. As I said in the introduction, you work for, whether it's paid or unpaid, I don't really, we don't need to say anything about it, but you work for a very famous or popular person named Monty Cook.
Absolutely.
Or his Monty Cook games. And I remember first discovering his work with a book that could probably kill someone.
Tallus.
Called Tolus, and it's a city setting. It was pretty amazing. It's one of those things where you read it and you want to find a bunch of people to play it, but then at the same time that finding a bunch of people to play it will probably be impossible.
I actually have a friend who lives in Atlanta who's actually coming up this weekend to play some games with me. He, I found out, has been running a decade-long Tallus campaign. So
that's amazing.
And it's a weekly campaign. I mean, this isn't once a month or something. It's a weekly Tallus campaign. It's really impressive. So Monty got well known by being one of the chief architects of the 3rd edition of D&D. And so this was in the period that I wasn't playing or really keeping up with the game. So I really didn't know his name. And a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, Eric, told me about a Kickstarter for a game he was writing called Numenera. And he said, hey, it's got a great guy working on it. You should check this out. And I checked out and fell in love with the setting from the initial art and descriptions. It just seemed like that was a niche that hadn't really been filled, and it kind of scratched my Star Wars-y itch, but it was weirder and fantasy-ish, and it just felt right. So he and I had been both gone to school for communications broadcasting, so we said, hey, let's do a podcast. And we'd been talking about it for some time. But when this came out, we're like, hey, nobody's doing one yet. Let's do a podcast about this new game. And we'll just speculate based on some of the materials that Monty was releasing, from the Kickstarter. So we did that with another friend, mutual friend of ours, Jim Ryan. By the second episode, he had found out about it and posted about it. And we were like, oh, cool. So we reached out to him, which we had initially, but I think what wires got crossed and he didn't catch on what we were seeking. But we got him on the third episode, and the podcast was called Transmissions from the Ninth World. And it's still on iTunes. We just haven't done a new episode in quite some time. But so we produced several episodes and very frequently would have him and his other collaborators on the show. And it was really fun getting involved with that. And we also ended up, I helped get a fan site started called Ninth World Hub. And we got more and more involved with him. So at Gen Con I believe it was in 2013, I went for the first time as an exhibitor. I helped him. They got me a badge, and I helped them sell the brand new game of Numenera, which had just come out physically at that time. Been doing more and more with him. So I just attended my fourth Gen Con in a row, and have been working as an exhibitor for Monty Cook Games every time, and continued to be involved. Got to have dinner with him and Shauna and my friend Brandon in Asheville the following year. Or no, it was actually just after that first Gen Con I went to them, and they told me about an upcoming Kickstarter called The Strange. Right. So they released that. And so Monty Cook has been doing the game company is formed based on the support for that initial Numenera Kickstarter, which raised over $500,000.
Right. I remember, I think Eric had turned me onto it as well, and I backed it. And it is really, the setting is really interesting. And as someone who has not played it, and obviously you have, can you just describe just a little bit about what Numenera and then The Strange, as far as like what their settings are?
So Numenera is 1 billion years in Earth's future. The world is it's called the Ninth World because 8 major civilizations have risen and fallen in the time before that. This is the first time that humans have been back on Earth for some time. The world has been completely reshaped. There's a supercontinent, and the original setting material focused on a very small corner of that supercontinent. Later books have kind of expanded from there, but it's still, if you see the image of that supercontinent and what sections have actually been revealed, there's a lot of space for them to grow and for you to build your own stuff outside of what they've done. One of the big focuses of the game is these weird bits of technology left over from civilizations in past. And it kind of follows the Arthur C. Clarke principle of any sufficiently advanced technology will appear as magic. So that's really the core of the game. And those bits of technology are called Numenera. That's where the title comes from. So you as a player are someone who excels at using and basically seeks out the mysteries of Numenera. It's a really fun game. It's probably one of the most fun, and I really need to get another game going for it because I really do enjoy playing in it.
Now, but before you start on The Strange, I wanted to, when I was reading Numenera, the thing that sprung to mind as far as if I'm picturing playing the game is almost a Indiana Jones Western kind of game. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, that's not. I mean, you're definitely kind of exploring mysteries, and I mean, yeah, there's definitely times you're going into a monument or something left over that is very Indiana Jones exploring type. But if you take what, let's say, like Indiana Jones in the beginning of Raiders, where he's in the, I don't remember, it was a Latin American ancient culture thing that he was in. That, if you imagine that, and instead of it being, ancient darts and stuff, it's more technological based. So there might be biohazards, or there might be nanotechnology that is what you're encountering instead of, crude darts and stuff. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The game was heavily influenced by some of the works of like Mobius. And it's just, weird is really the key component of it. And so much so that they actually created a accessory to help with the game called the Weird Deck. And it specifically has bits of information that as a GM you can randomly draw and say, oh, this weird thing, you just encountered this weird thing, to help give you that flavor. Because that's certainly a struggle for someone when you're playing a Star Wars game. If you're playing with people that are actively Star Wars fans, whether it's just the movies or even the movies, the comics, the expanded universe, all that type of thing, you have a language that you can speak. I can mention a Rhodian, and you, as a Star Wars fan, would instantly picture a Greedo type, being. Numenera is a little harder because when you kind of create things, it's easy for people to slip into kind of the fantasy mode if they've played D&D and thinking on it in a fantasy setting context. So you have to try and really bring the weird.
Right. And
there's certainly a lot of materials that will help with that. The game setting is very feudal era-like. So it's a weird contrast of the civilizations being kind of feudal-like, but there being these bits of technology. It does harken a little to Eberron. One of the things I loved about Eberron was, if you're living in a world with magic, why are people not using magic as kind of a technology to do things? And that's one thing Eberron addressed and actually did, and I really appreciate it. Numenera is kind of similar, but the things that you experience are weird enough. They're not commonplace because it occurs in pockets. You might go to some village, and it may be what you think of as kind of a westerny town, kind of dot in the middle of nowhere. They may have perfected a certain bit of Numenera that acts as hoverboards, whereas if you'd been to any other city, no one else has seen or used that kind of thing. Right. So that's a good comparison for, what it's like to be in that world. Yeah. And we have, there's episodes of Transmissions from the Ninth World where we go into depth about what's it like to, explore, and what is life like in the Ninth World.
Okay. And then Monty Cook then went from there to a game system called a game setting. Yep. Rather, The Strange.
Yep. So the first year I went to Gen Con, they announced that Monty Cook Games was being joined by a guy who used to work at TSR named Bruce Cordell. Interesting story. Bruce and Monty were friends from like middle school. And I believe it was Monty who kind of coaxed Bruce to giving game writing a try. He was actually a biotech scientist of some kind. But anyway, so Bruce coming on board, one of the things that him coming on board led to was his game called The Strange, based on Monty Cook's development of the Cypher system, but largely Bruce's vision for The Strange. The Strange it's kind of Men in Black meets Sliders. Yeah, that's a pretty good mix. So what the concept is it's modern Earth, but there are secrets that most people don't know, and in those secrets are gateways to other worlds. Well, most of these worlds are not planets like we think of, but they're called recursions. These are like pockets in space that are reflective usually of some media. So there might be a recursion based on Oz. So if you ever wanted to visit Oz, you could go and visit Oz. Now, there might be multiple recursions of Oz. There might be one that's more reflective of the MGM movie. There's one that may be more reflective of the books as written. The concept is that these worlds largely exist because we read about them. We say you and I are both reading Oz. We both get mental images of what Oz is like, and that's a lot of where these recursions come from.
Okay.
But what's cool about it is that they're pockets, right? So anything that's not really in the books would not be there. So it's really a cool experience. But what's nice about that game system is there is a meta plot about people wanting to, bring things from one recursion to another, and powerful items. And those are typically your ciphers, just like Numenera has their version of the ciphers. What's cool for a game system is, like, I've played in a strange game where we started and we were in a very metaphysical space area, kind of like nowhere from Guardians of the Galaxy. And then 2 sessions later, we were in a Western recursion. So it was very tropey of Western worlds. And what you're often doing is, so you're in a Western world, but there's somebody there or people there that are bringing stuff that doesn't belong there from one or two of the other recursions. So that's a lot of what you do in the game. It's investigations and, uncovering these plots to kind of cross technology across that. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome.
I meant to say, so after that one, then later on we were in one that was like a 90s spy movie. So there's lots of cool recursions that are built. So like their setting books are, filled with recursions, and there might be one that's Star Wars like, and there might be one that's like Terminator like, and all these different things that have been built to different levels. So a lot of fun.
Awesome. So with Monty Cook Games now, you are like super into the role-playing world. Right. So as it is.
Yeah. So
I mean, not only that, but you also have a real full-time job on top of what you do.
Yeah. So my involvement with Monty Cook has been supporting as a fan largely. I did work kind of part-time last year with the title of fan relations coordinator, but they realized what I was doing and what they needed for a company was a full-time position. A well-known guy in the industry, Sean Reynolds, has not really taken over the job. They've created a new position called community relations coordinator. So it's a broader based thing that he delivers. He is doing a lot of the things to build the brand, and like they're rolling out a organized play for Numenera, and later they'll do it for other groups or for their other games. It's a pretty awesome company. They're very small. There's only, I think, 8 full-time people with them still. And if you look at the level of what they've created and put out in 4 years' time, it's amazing. So they put out Numenera, they've put out The Strange, they put source books out for both of those games. And what's nice is the way they do it in the Kickstarter is essentially by the end of the Kickstarter, you've got about a year's worth of material that's going to be delivered to you. And they've really perfected, built good stretch goals. They normally fund their project in a day or two, and then the rest of the time it's just all these stretch goals to give you more and more bang for your buck.
Right.
And then they did the Cypher System rule book. And then the most recent new game they put out was called No Thank You Evil, which was they took the Cypher system and they kind of made a simplified version for kids. And it's a single box game thus far, and great accolades. They just won a golden Emmy for best family game. I highly recommend it if you're a role play gamer and want to get your kids into role playing. That's a great transition, entry to it. It's also great for if you're a teacher that wants to encourage kind of cooperative play and imaginative play. No Thank You Evil is perfect for that. I highly recommend that game.
Yeah, I have it sitting here in its box that I still have yet to open.
Yep. And there's a small window because kids want to grow up so fast these days. I got a 5 and a 9-year-old myself, and they want to grow up so fast. So my 9-year-old, I think, is just at the cusp of that being a little too kiddie-ish for him, especially as into Star Wars as I've turned him. So, but then MCG. Another involvement. So we did podcasts. So I did the transmissions for the Ninth World for Numenera. When they announced The Strange, Brandon and I started one called Translating the Strange. That's also on iTunes. And now, or last year, I thought, well, with as big as a basis they're growing, wouldn't it be cool, like in the old days, D&D had Dragon Magazine and Dungeon Magazine, which were two magazines that supported and gave good material, and were also a great kind of proving ground for people who wanted to write that kind of material. So I getting really involved with the fans as I have been through the podcast and the websites and supporting at the Gen Con. I know a lot of people that were uber creative people who were excited and involved in the Monte Cook game community. So we created first an umbrella organization we call the Cyphercast Network. That includes our podcasts, the website, which is now the Cyphercast Hub, the ninthworld.com, which was a separate site focused on Numenera material. And then I started a magazine called Cyphercaster Magazine. We have released 6 issues. I'm working on the 7th right now. And in a year, we've sold about 2,000 copies across the 6 issues. So I'm real proud of the work that we've done with that. We have a superior support deal with Monte Cook. It's not an official magazine. It's not a Monte Cook production. Everything created is fan created. So we have contributors, and then they get a percentage of the profits based on their contributions. So the number of pages equal exactly a percentage of the profits. And those are available on drivethrurpg.com. And as I said, our first issue is a gold bestseller. And the other issues have all taken off quite well. Our last issue, we normally do about 40 pages an issue. That's every 2 months. Our last issue, we really kind of blew it out. We had a 60-page issue because we had a feature for a setting for the Cypher system, which could also easily be a recursion in The Strange, that we called Sector Agents, which was taking influence from like Green Lantern and Alien Legion comics, basically intergalactic cops, little Star Frontiers influence as well. It's a fun, cool thing. So we had a 20-page section on that with multiple people contributing. It was definitely a passion project for me, and we'll probably keep doing some material in just about every issue to continue to support that. Okay.
Now, moving from role-playing games, what else is something that you are into?
Well, let me, before we move on.
Okay.
One last thing with Monte Cook Games is they just this week released a new Kickstarter for a completely new game called Invisible Sun. It's not a Cypher System game, although there are some similarities to the constructs in Cypher System. But this is a super deluxe high-end game. It's the entry level at the Kickstarter is $197. It is a cube box that they designed. It's really cool. You can see it on the Kickstarter. And it's going to have a board, multiple books, some cards, several decks of cards. What Monty came up with this game, and it's very kind of occult and unraveling the mysteries of the strange, and they're building a lot of functions in there to help you run a game in this kind of world that's app based and book based and all that. It's an incredible game that's been pitched. You have to go and see it. It's going to be unique. It's going to be definitely an experience. And as I said, $197 gets you that full box set. So one of the things they're really kind of pitching is this is deluxe and this is a big experience. This might not be something that whereas most games, everybody at the table is going to buy the core book and need the core book. This game is not really going to be that. This is one that if you have a good gaming group that is interested in this, maybe everybody contributes and the GM gets to keep puts the majority in, and they get to keep the big box, but everybody contributes in order to play it. And there's a second, the next level above that, which I think is like $536. Not only do you get the box, but you get what's called a directed campaign. So basically, for a full year after you start, Monte Cook Games will feed you individualized, specific information that will kind of help guide your game. So, including some potential physical materials. So, say we're starting a table game. As you start, I may get them to trigger a random delivery to your house that comes from somewhere strange and kind of invites you into the mystery of a certain organization that you're going to be involved. Your character will end up being involved with. Very cool concepts that Monty's putting out here. It's definitely a pretty cool thing, and their stretch goal, their project goal was over $210. I'm sorry, $210,000, and they reached that in about 30 hours. So, pretty impressive. And where they're going to take this is seems like it's going to go in a really unique way.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I looked at, and with no solid gaming group, I realized it was not a thing for me to have quite yet. Yeah. But I do like the concepts that they have of the stuff being sent direct, like as geared towards your campaign or your players, and having the apps available for like doing side stuff, either like over the internet or like meeting up like before your gaming group meets up. So it's pretty cool concept.
Yeah, there's a couple sort of looking for a couple cool package gift things that you can get online. I think it's called the mystery package or something of that nature. That you can sign up for. And I think that's a lot of what's kind of their inspiration for tying this into an RPG game. I'm very interested to see what they end up pulling off for this.
Absolutely. So now, yes. Where would you like to go next? I will leave it to you.
Sure. I mentioned Star Wars. Star Wars was really, I was pretty young. I was about 3 when Star Wars came out, so you can figure out my age pretty easily from that. It was very, very influential on me. What Lucas did, basing off of with Joseph Campbell's. I can't think of the hero's journey and all that. Anyway, the myth stuff and the archetypal figures that he incorporated into Star Wars to create a modern day mythology really spoke to me, and has defined a lot of my interest in my life. Star Wars led me really to comics. I'd seen some of the superhero stuff, but it was Star Wars comics that I kind of started with, which led more into G.I. Joe, and G.I. Joe was kind of a replacement once Star Wars kind of wound down a little bit in the mid 80s. The concepts from the movie about good versus evil and the Force. Star Wars really even influenced my perspective on spirituality and religion. Most of the things that I'm into, I can kind of point to some correlation with Star Wars in some fashion. So it's definitely been my earliest fandom. I got all the action figures when I was little. Actually, when I ended up giving, of course, as you mature, a lot of people give away all their toys to younger, friends and family. And I did that with a lot of my stuff. And I regretted it later, of course. So when they started putting new action figures out in the late 90s, myself and some friends got into it a lot. So I've got a huge stash of Star Wars action figures from, the 90s to early 2000s. And, I've been doling them out to my kids, both of them. It's something they've really taken to and love. So I've spread my fandom to them for sure. And Star Wars makes it easy because they've, done so much these days, especially with the new movies and shows like the Clone Wars and Rebels. They've really done a tremendous job with the fandom. And yeah, everybody poo-poos on the prequels, but they were pretty darn cool when they came out. We can recognize their faults a little easier now, but they still I still love Star Wars.
Awesome. Which do you have like a favorite movie?
Yeah, Empire, easily. Although I have to say, Force Awakens was pretty darn good. A couple faults with it, but very, very minor. It's I'm really excited about Rogue One. Looks like it's going to be tremendous. And then, of course, the follow-up to Force Awakens next year will. We're going to have a new Star Wars movie every year for probably here on out. I mean, it's going to really be hard to see that die in our lifetime anyway. So
right, I know. I wasn't looking forward to Force Awakens mostly because when Disney acquired it and decided to go in the direction they did, and I've said it before on a few podcasts that. I grew up with the expanded universe.
Sure.
And when they said, okay, it's kind of being shuffled off to the side for this new universe, it hurt me.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that way, and I feel that way too in some regards. Mm-hmm. But I also look at it as they did the expanded universe because they didn't believe that they could do the things that they can do now, right? That they didn't know that there would be a major corporation that could fully get behind and produce the type of materials we would want to see. So, I'm happy with the expanded universe being there and available and you can still see it, but I also understand that they didn't want to be handcuffed to that. I mean, would we have ever been really happy getting like the Thrawn trilogy as our next movie set? I don't know. I think if you read those, they're a little dated, right?
Right. They are, honestly.
Yeah, and there's so much. I mean, those were done even before the prequels, so there's so much that happened in the prequels that kind of negates some of the stuff in those. So I understand why they needed to do that, and the material is still there. You can still read it and get enjoyment out of it, and I'm okay with that. And
as far as the Rogue One goes. Phenomenal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like the way, because Force Awakens was its own thing, but Rogue One just has that Star Wars feel, and it's between like the grittiness of it, having the classics, classic look and the feel of it, the characters that they have running around. Now, again, was I disappointed that they named a movie Rogue One and it's not being based on like X-Wing Rogue Squadron?
Sure.
A little bit, but I'm interested to see if it slowly develops into something where they're going to keep this cast of characters around for another movie or two.
That's a question because it's said to be truly a standalone, but maybe we'll get a Rogue 2. Maybe it'll be that popular. I'm very, very interested in Jyn Erso. I think there's something key about that. I don't want to go into spoilers on a podcast, but I think that her as a character is going to be very intriguing. But and then what's next after Episode 8? They're going to have the new young Han Solo movie, which supposedly is going to be a trilogy, and then the Boba Fett movie that's in development as well. So, God, there's so many good options that they can do here. What I'm going to be really interested to see is how many people react to the Rogue One, that it was good and it's a great thing, but it's not the Star Wars that we're used to, right? That it's not, they're talking, it's not going to have a crawl and it's not going to, it probably isn't going to have John Williams music to it. I think they've already said that that's not going to be the case. It's going to be interesting to see how it resonates with people. What I feel like they're doing is what Disney and Marvel have done so successfully with the Marvel products. If you watch a Marvel movie, yes, it's a superhero movie, but they now have done them so that they're reflective of a different genre, right?
Right.
You watched Ant-Man, and that was a heist movie. You watched Captain America: Winter Soldier, and that was a 70s political thriller. They have all these nice things that they recognize that the superhero does not have to be the sole definition of what the movie is. I'm hoping that that's where they're going with these Star Wars movies, that, this Star Wars movie looks like the Dirty Dozen, right? Rogue One.
Right.
If they can do that with these other things, I think that it's going to be a much more, you're going to have the big epic things that are the episode ones, but to have these smaller, different stories, I think it's going to make the franchise last longer and have more appeal, a broader appeal than they already do.
Absolutely. And I'm real interested to see where they go with, especially with the Han Solo movie or trilogy, whatever they decide to do with it.
That one I feel is more dangerous than Rogue One. I think whereas Rogue One, people are going to feel like it's not the Star Wars they're used to. My fear is that they've got such a iconic character in Han Solo. I mean, Han Solo is by far like my favorite character ever. The lovable rogue, that lovable scoundrel, I think is the archetypal. I love that role of skeptic, still has a heart of gold but has rough edges, okay to bend rules if it's for the right reasons. I love that kind of character, and to see them have that character dedicated and not played by Harrison Ford and younger, I think they're going to be fighting a lot of preconceived notions about what a Han's, he's going to have to do a tough job. They've done plenty of movies recently where people have filled in roles. I mean, you look at, say, for the faults of the new Star Trek movies, the characters they cast in them so perfectly nail the key components of the original actors and the original performances, but still are their own, things, right?
Right.
If they can and it looks like the guy they got to play Han Solo is going to, look the part and feel the part. It's going to be interesting to see if he pulls off that chemistry and that, strong character.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. And I do tons of stuff Star Wars. The other things, aside from role-playing games, I'm also into a lot of board and miniature games. And Fantasy Flight has built a tremendous lineup of Star Wars-related games, from X-Wing, which is probably one of my favorite games ever. And those who don't know, it's a miniature starship dogfighting battle. And they have so many pieces out for it now. It's easy to get into it, but it's also there's a lot out there.
Yes, there is.
And then they took to the next level up and created Armada, so that's more your capital ships, your bigger Star Destroyers and all that. The fighters in that are teeny weeny and are in fighter groups in order to to match the scale, and that's a lot of fun. I like X-Wing much more, but Armada is a good game. They've done Imperial Assault, which is they have an old game called Descent that is very much a dungeon crawl game, and Imperial Assault is basically a Star Wars skinning of that rule set. And they did a new skinning of it for a Doom game, so it's the same type of rules, but different things. And Imperial Assault's a lot of fun too. They've just announced a dice game for it. They've got a living card game. They've really done a good job. Oh, and I just picked up at Gen Con Star Wars Rebellion, which is basically a Empire versus the Rebellion on a broad galaxy-wide map. So you're hiding your rebel base from the Imperials as you try to undermine them, and they've got overwhelming forces in comparison to you. It's really, I'm super excited. I'm so excited about it, knowing I have a friend coming over this weekend. I already have the game set up on my dining room table ready to go.
Awesome.
So, yeah, I'm uber geeky about that. And then one other game, it's not Star Wars, but it's definitely got a Star Wars feel, is a game called Twilight Imperium, and I am gaga over that game. It's basically a 4X game on the tabletop. It starts out as 6 players, but with expansions you can play up to 8 players. You have an empire, you build the galaxy together, and then you attempt to take over the galaxy, and with diplomacy and warfare and trading and all sorts of crazy stuff. I can't recommend this game enough. You certainly have to have players to play it. I've played a couple 3-player games, and the tough thing about that is it's so easy to end up ganging up on one person. But I'm hoping with the number of people I've got coming this weekend, we're going to be able to play a good game of that.
Yeah, I've always seen that, and it's like, wow, I'd really like to have that, but then again, not enough people, and then not enough time.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, a good game of that is going to take you, 3 to 4 hours, maybe more, maybe up to 6 to 8, depending on how many people you got playing. We blocked off a whole day of gaming this Saturday, and I'm really excited about playing a good game of that.
Absolutely. Now, another game that you and I are into on the PC, which it's on Xbox, I think, and maybe PlayStation 4. I don't know because I don't have any of the updated systems. But you and I both love XCom.
Oh, yes. So I fell in love with XCOM back in '94 when the first one came out.
Oh, yeah.
Played that, played Terror from the Deep. I love video games. I'm not very good at them, and there's very few games I've completed. Most of the games in the XCOM series I have. The style of gameplay for me, I mean, in many ways, it's like a miniature game on the computer, right? You've got your squad and it's turn-based, so you don't have to be good at mashing buttons at a certain time. It's much more strategy-based, and I love that about this game system. When they brought out the new version a couple years back, just fell in love. They really brought up kept the feel of the original game, but brought up the graphics and brought up the options. And the sequel just came out the end of last year. Or is it earlier this year? I can't remember.
End of last year, I think.
XCOM 2 is probably the greatest game I've ever played. I can't stress enough. I've already played it. I was telling David earlier, I've played it over 200 hours on my PC and beaten it like 5 times. And I'm actually playing now on commander level with Iron Man, which means, only one save. No saves coming, which I'm part of the reason I've actually won the game multiple times is I'm a bad save scummer. So I'm playing on Iron Man, and there's a great modding community out there. Guys who did a really cool mod for the first reboot called The Long War, which is very good if you haven't gotten it. They started their own studio based off of the work they did on that. And they just released a XCOM 2 mod called the Alien Pack. And it adds something like, I want to say it's like 15 to 20 new aliens into the mix. Just love the fact that it really expands your game so much and gives you so much option. Because one of the cool things about the game is that when you start getting good at it, you start knowing, oh, okay, if I want to beat this kind of alien, I got to do this. You start learning the tricks to beat that alien. And they still get harder, and they still, they have multiple numbers of them or come in different ways. But you start to figure out how to beat these things, right? Adding in this many new aliens to give different flavors and all that, I mean, it's really cool because then all of a sudden it's like it's a whole new game again. I can't express enough how cool it is to play this.
And not only that, but I think more so with XCOM, the new XCOM 2, as opposed to the one that they released, XCOM. I fell in love with my squad on XCOM 2 so much more than the original. They
have a lot more customization options, I think, which helps. And I love the classes that they've built to this new XCOM 2. I remember when they the intro trailer for XCOM 2 came out, because they hadn't really said they were doing it, and it came out. And they had these new aliens. And the other cool thing about XCOM 2 is the premise is you lost XCOM 1. I love that. The intent is that you've lost XCOM 1 and you're on Earth and you're truly guerrillas trying to fight back and take back your Earth. It is literally one of the best games I've ever played. Level wise, it's procedurally generated, so you're hardly ever going to, I mean, you might come across buildings or sections that remind you of different things, and there's definitely zones that remind you of maybe a map you've been on before, but every map you come to is technically different than the one any other one you've come to. I can't recommend this game enough. And they've already released 2 DLCs that have added a lot to the game. And that's not even counting the mods that are available. So, best game ever. I would love to have a tabletop role-playing game that reflected XCOM. And we've talked about doing that. Unfortunately, I think the Cypher system is not as tactically crunchy as you would want it to be.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, the other thing about XCOM, I mentioned earlier, I was a big fan of G.I. Joe growing up, based on the comics more so than the cartoons. But the XCOM feels like a G.I. Joe game. I always said, I can't believe no one has ever modded this to just be a G.I. Joe game, right? Somebody released a mod of a character pack with like hundreds of named and look-wise G.I. Joes. So like the current one I'm playing in, I've got that character pack. So, I just lost my Storm Shadow and my Lady J. It's really, oh man, I just love it so much.
I always, whenever I start a game, I always make my friends, and then it's so sad when they die. And I think in the last game that I had set up, I had a Reese.
Oh, nice.
And Reese had turned into the sharpshooter, and let's just say that at one point he just got caught off guard and bit the big one, and I couldn't even go back for his body.
Oh, that sucks.
Because that's the other thing in the game is that you can carry these people out because since you're in the guerrilla position, you've got to get their stuff off of them.
Yeah, that's one thing that they had in the old game that they've never had, even in XCOM 2, where if one of your guys goes down and has something that would be useful, you can't like stand over his body and pick it up anymore.
Right.
But if you leave their bodies, then anything they do have on them is lost to you forever. I still wish that was something somebody would mod and fix. So if one of your guys goes down and still has a grenade and no one else has one, that you could go, or a med kit even, that you could go over their body and pick that up again. That would be that's something I really missed from the original series.
Yeah, that would be real helpful, especially the med kits.
Yeah. So back to, I was talking about bringing XCOM to the table, and even G.I. Joe. I would love to do a G.I. Joe tabletop game, right? I have been building a base for an RPG rule set to handle a more tactical style game. A lot of the tactical or more, like if you play like Pathfinder, the combat can get very crunchy, very rules oriented and all that type of thing. What I'm trying to do is find a nice medium between feeling like you have that kind of action points and movement and having to save an amount of time to fire off a shot, have that kind of balance, but have it be a little bit more simplified. I'm kind of taking some of the rules from like Hero Clicks and merging it with some more crunchier rule sets. I'm excited about doing something with that. I don't know if I'll ever do anything, release it other than just share it with friends or something. But I'm really excited about doing something like that.
Have you ever looked at a book that came out in it's got to be late 90s or early 2000s? I believe it was Spycraft.
Yeah, I know Spycraft.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of when you were talking about that, was like something similar to that.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever run it, but I've definitely seen it and looked through it. Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about before we wrap this up?
The only other thing is I really wish somebody could better handle G.I. Joe. I think it's there's cool characters that kind of came out of that. If you ever saw, they did a web series called G.I. Joe Resolute. If you have not ever seen that and have any like of G.I. Joe, you must check that out. That's fantastic. The only other thing I would say is if you're a Star Wars fan and have never checked out Star Blazers. Star Blazers was a Japanimation that actually came out before Star Wars in '74, called Space Battleship Yamato. And then after the success of Star Wars, they did a repackaging, an English version of it called Star Blazers. Great series. Well, in recent years, it's had a big resurgence of fans, and they did a live action movie, which was okay. It wasn't terrible. It actually owed a lot more to like Battlestar Galactica, the reboot. But then last year they did a cartoon remake with modern, cartoon styles and everything. Like it's Space Battleship Yamato 2199 or Star Blazers 2199. So good. They expanded the original series premise, but the core plot is the same. They added more characters and all that. One of my all-time favorite things, probably second only to Star Wars. I definitely would recommend that.
Where can people find either the G.I. Joe Resolute or the Star Blazers if they want to check it
Resolute,
out?
I've looked. There's nobody streaming it. It's not on Netflix. You can't buy it from iTunes. The only place you can probably get it is they did make a DVD release, so you might be able to get that on Amazon still. The $21.99, I've had to go. They were producing it was English dubbed. Not dub, sorry, English subtitled. They've never done they were going to do a dub version, but I haven't heard what's happened to it. So you're going to probably have to get a Japanese version of that. There is, they started releasing a Blu-ray set in English, the packaging was in English, but it was still Japanese language. You can find that on Amazon. You might also hit some of the Japanese ordering sites. I can't think of the name of those, like Asia Yes or something. I don't know. So they're worth checking out. They're really, really good. Certainly have a little bit more of a military thing, but I really, really like those series.
Okay. And for people that are listening, and if they are interested in Numenera or The Strange or Cypher, where should they go?
Absolutely. MontyCookGames.com. They've got a tremendous site with a lot of information about their games, the store right on the game site. Of course, all their PDF materials are also available in DriveThruRPG, where you can find the Cyphercaster magazine as well. I didn't even say the Cyphercaster magazine is every issue is $4, so very reasonable. And we actually have a bundle for the first 4 issues for like $10. So you can get all 6 issues for like less than $20 right now. And I'm working on the 7th issue, and we'll continue to produce it. We have coverage from MCG about their new games. We have fan materials, everything from adventures to short fiction to setting material, like I talked about the Sector Agents, community news. It's a great, I'm really proud of what we've done, and the contributors' work is just phenomenal. That's probably the thing I'm proudest of producing, and I hope we continue working on it.
And you, of course, have the 2 podcasts that have all of their episodes still available.
Yeah. We've talked about kind of forming a single one, but there's been a lot of other very, very good Cypher system-based podcasts that have formed since we were doing those. We're still trying to figure out, do we come back into a unified show or what? So we'll see where that goes. I'd like to get back into podcasting. I miss it, but the magazine has eaten up a lot of time this past year.
Yeah, I can imagine. Print is something where, not only do you have people contributing, but you've got layout and art and everything else.
Yep, absolutely. And, I'm the publisher. I do the layout. I make the art purchases for the cover and some interior art. It's a full-time, part-time job.
All right, David. Well, that's pretty much what time we've got for right now. I know we left a lot on the table. I'm looking at our notes here, and the 13,000 comics is something I'd like to revisit in a future episode.
I'd be happy to.
Whenever we have time.
Absolutely.
That, and we can always delve into music. So
yeah, I'm a music nerd too.
Well, that's it for today, and I'm going to get out of here. So I will catch you later.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.